Have you ever walked into a place where you knew you belonged, only to be told you didn't imagine being dismissed? Not because of what you've done, but because of how you look. On a humid morning in Miami, a black woman quietly walked into a private banking lounge, dressed in simple jeans and a sweater. No flashy watch, no designer bag. She only wanted to withdraw her own money. Instead, she was mocked, accused of fraud, and even had security called on her. Now here's the twist in less than 10 minutes. The same woman revealed she wasn't just a client. She was the CEO who owned the entire bank. And in that moment, every insult, every biased word came back like a mirror to those who had spoken them. If you were in her place, would you have stayed silent, endured the humiliation, and waited for the truth to speak, or would you have walked away, carrying the pain with you? This is not just her story. It's a question for all of us. What would you do if the world doubted your worth? Stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe, because the story you're about to hear may remind you of your own. On a warm Monday morning in Manhattan, the marble floors of the Heritage First Bank Private Client Lounge gleamed under recessed lighting. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee beans, a polished scent of wealth and exclusivity. At exactly 9:12 a.m., the heavy glass doors parted, and a woman walked in. She didn't look like the usual clients who filled this room with their tailored suits and designer handbags. She wore a navy blazer, a simple cream blouse, and a pair of comfortable flats. No jewelry glittered on her wrists. No logo screamed from her bag. In her right hand, she carried only a slim leather folder. Her name was Alicia Carter, 48 years old, founder and CEO of Carter Enterprises, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that 2 years earlier had acquired Heritage First Bank. But no one in this room seemed to know or care who she was. That was exactly how Alicia had planned it. She had come here without an entourage, without announcements, without warning. For weeks, she had wondered what would happen if she walked into one of her own branches as just another woman, blacks middle-aged, dressed in plain clothes and asked for service. Today was that test. Alicia took a calm breath as she crossed the lounge. She nodded at the front desk clerk, who barely looked up before waving her toward the velvet chairs in the waiting area. She thanked him softly and sat down at a polished walnut table near the window. She placed her folder in front of her and waited. The quiet lasted less than a minute. A voice, sharp as glass, cut across the room. "This lounge is for real clients. You need to leave." The words belonged to Susan Walker, the branch manager. Her tone was crisp, the kind used to correct a child rather than address an adult. Susan's eyes flicked up and down Alicia's clothes, pausing on the scuffed flats, the modest folder, the absence of glitter. Alicia did not flinch. She had heard versions of that sentence her whole life when she was 23, and a bank froze her account because she deposited her first real estate commission. When she was 30 and told a loan officer she had too little credibility, even though she had more collateral than required. Now, decades later, worth billions, she sat silently as those same 8 words returned like an old wound. This lounge is for real clients. Around them, a few heads turned. An elderly man sipping espresso raised his brow, but said nothing. A young couple by the glass divider exchanged whispers. The marble floor might as well have been a stage. The spotlight had already found Alicia. Before she could reply, another voice joined in. Smooth, arrogant, dripping with disdain. "People like her don't belong in this room." The comment came from Gregory Hale, a tall man in a charcoal suit, a platinum card half visible in his breast pocket. His words carried not just bias, but entitlement, the kind that grows louder when spoken in public, daring anyone to challenge it. Alicia's chest tightened, but her face stayed calm. She folded her hands in her lap. Years of boardrooms, hostile negotiations, and dismissive stares had trained her for this very moment. She wanted to speak. She wanted to tell them that she had built Carter Enterprises from a single duplex in Brooklyn, that she had weathered recessions and acquisitions, that she now owned more than 70% of the institution they were standing in. But she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she let the silence breathe. Susan stepped closer, heels clicking against the floor. "Ma'am, this area is for private clients only. Please return to the main lobby." Her smile was thin, polite on the surface, but her eyes glimmered with something colder. Alicia looked at her for a long moment, then spoke in a voice measured, calm, and low. "I'll wait here." Susan's expression tightened. Gregory chuckled, shaking his head as if the scene were entertainment. He muttered to the man beside him, loud enough for Alicia to hear, "She probably wandered in thinking she could cash a paycheck. What a joke." The words landed heavier than the marble beneath their feet. Alicia's mind flicked back, uninvited, to memories of her mother, a nurse who had worked double shifts to put food on the table, who had been followed around department stores for daring to browse the wrong racks. She had once told Alicia, "The world will try to shrink you. Don't let them. Even if your voice shakes, speak," sitting in the lounge of her own bank. Alicia felt both the sting of that memory and the steel it had left inside her. She straightened her back. She wouldn't raise her voice. She wouldn't make a scene. Not yet, because the real scene, the one that would change everything, was only just beginning. Alicia Carter didn't move from her seat. Her fingers rested lightly on the leather folder, her gaze fixed straight ahead as if the marble floor itself had asked her to stay. The room grew restless. Shoes tapped against polished stone. Coffee cups clinked louder than usual. In a place designed for quiet transactions and hushed conversations, Alicia's presence had become a disruption simply because she refused to leave. Susan Walker, the branch manager, pressed her lips together in irritation. She leaned slightly over the table where Alicia sat, her perfume sharp, her tone sharper. "Ma'am, if you have business here, you'll need to provide proof of funds. We can't just have anyone walking into the private lounge." Alicia tilted her head slowly, her calm unbroken. "I'm here to make a withdrawal." The words seemed ordinary, but they landed like a challenge. Susan blinked, then gave a short, humorless laugh. "A withdrawal? From this lounge?" "Yes," Alicia replied simply. $250,000. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. A man at the espresso bar nearly dropped his spoon. Gregory Hale, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, let out a loud scoff. "Did you hear that he said to no one in particular, though his voice carried across the room, 'She wants $250,000 in cash. What is this, a game show?'" A few quiet chuckles bubbled up from nearby clients, not out of amusement, but discomfort. They laughed the way people laugh when they don't know how else to react. Susan straightened. "That's a substantial amount, ma'am. We'll need immediate verification of your accounts, your source of income, and compliance protocol," interrupted Megan Price, the private banker standing near the desk. Her voice was crisp, as if she'd memorized every regulation word for word. "Large withdrawals from unverified clients must be flagged as potential fraud." Her eyes flicked to Alicia's shoes again, to her plain blazer. This could easily be stolen funds. The words floated in the air, sharper than any shout. Stolen. That single word didn't just question the money. It questioned Alicia herself, her presence, her dignity, her right to exist in this space. Gregory grinned as though he'd been waiting for such confirmation. Exactly. You see, some people stroll in here thinking they can play rich. Next thing you know, the bank's on the hook for laundering. Alicia blinked slowly. Her face remained calm, but inside, something stirred. That word stolen pulled her backward in time. She was 26 again, sitting across from a loan officer who'd called her high risk. She had brought 30% more collateral than required. It hadn't mattered. His smile, then, was the same as Gregory's now. A smile that said, "You don't belong here." She was 32 again, buying her third property, when a notary demanded she produce 2 additional forms of ID just to be sure. She remembered standing in that office, heat rising in her chest, knowing she had more proof than anyone else in the room, yet still being treated like a trespasser. And now, 2 decades later, with billions in assets, the scene was replaying itself, same lines, same looks, same disbelief. But Alicia didn't raise her voice. Instead, she let her silence stretch until Susan shifted uncomfortably. Then, with measured calm, she said, "Run my name." Susan's brows furrowed. "We don't run names until you're verified." "You'll want to run it," Alicia replied. Gregory chuckled darkly. "Why don't you save us all the trouble and head down the street? I'm sure the pawn shop would be happy to help you with $100. From his pocket, he pulled a folded slip of paper, scrawled something, and flicked it across the floor. The note slid across the marble and came to rest at Alicia's foot. A young woman nearby, Maria Sanchez, leaned forward, picked it up, and gasped softly. Then, with her voice shaking but audible, she read, "Go to a pawn shop." The room stirred. An older man muttered shameful. A younger client shifted in his chair, uneasy. Alicia looked down at the note, then back at Gregory. Her expression didn't change, but her voice gained a thread of steel. "Every word you've spoken today destroys this institution more than any fraud ever could." Susan smirked, clearly enjoying the performance of authority. "You're not a client. You're a con artist. Play rich somewhere else." The insult rang louder than the chatter around them. In the far corner, Daniel Kim, a 31-year-old engineer, raised his phone, red light blinking as he began recording. His face burned with anger at what he was witnessing. Alicia turned her head toward him, her voice still steady. "Don't." "Not yet. We settle this with facts, not footage." Daniel hesitated, but Alicia's calm cut through his urgency. He lowered the phone, though his grip on it remained tight. Nearby, Robert Lewis, a retired teacher in his late 50s, shifted forward in his chair. He'd been watching quietly, his jaw tightening with every insult. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but resolute. "This is foul," he said, his gaze fixed on Susan and Gregory. Alicia turned to him, her eyes softening. "Speak up," she said. Robert stood. His voice wavered at first, then strengthened. "She's not the problem. You are." Susan rolled her eyes. Gregory smirked. Megan crossed her arms. "Security's on standby," Megan muttered. Gregory leaned back, arms wide as if he owned the air itself. "Tell me, do any of you really believe this woman has $500,000 sitting in an account here? Look at her." He laughed, shaking his head. "She probably found someone's login and thinks she can drain it before we catch on." The words rippled through the room like acid. Alicia's chest tightened again, but she didn't look down. She stared at Susan, then at Megan, then at Gregory, and finally, she spoke. "You're wrong." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The certainty in her tone drew silence where shouting never could. Inside, though, her mind raced. Every insult was a blade, and though she had armor, it still cut. She thought of all the time she'd endured this in silence, and she wondered, for the briefest moment, if staying calm was enough, if today, in this room, she would need to do more than endure. The tension was unbearable now, every breath thick with expectation. Somewhere in the distance, Alicia could hear her own heartbeat. She laid her hand flat on the folder before her. It wasn't just a folder. Inside were documents, credentials, the quiet truth of who she was. She could open it. She could end this now. But she didn't. Not yet. Because sometimes, she knew, the storm had to run its course before the sky could clear. And in this room, the storm was only just beginning. The marble lounge felt colder now, though the air conditioning hadn't changed. Conversations dimmed into uneasy murmurs, the kind of whispers that follow a sudden storm. Alicia Carter sat quietly, still centered in her chair, but the weight of the room pressed harder with every second. Susan Walker was done waiting. She turned sharply toward the reception desk and snapped her fingers. "Derek, now." A moment later, Derek Coleman, the branch's head of security, entered the lounge. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in the Navy uniform of Heritage First Bank Security. The badge above his chest caught the light as he strode in, his posture already signaling authority. "What's the issue?" Derek asked, scanning the room. Susan pointed directly at Alicia. "She doesn't belong here. She's attempting a fraudulent withdrawal and refuses to leave." The words hit like a gavel. Several clients shifted in their seats, some nodding as if that explained everything. Others looked uncertain, glancing at Alicia, then back at Susan. Derek's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, I'll need to see your identification." Alicia looked up at him. "Steady. I've already told them. Run my name. That's not how this works." Susan cut in quickly. "We don't run names without prior verification. She knows that." Gregory Hale leaned back in his chair, enjoying the spectacle. "You're wasting your time. Man, people like her don't have IDs that match their stories." His voice carried, his smirk taunting. Derek planted himself in front of Alicia's chair. His shadow fell across her lap. "Stand up, ma'am. We can sort this outside." "No," Alicia said calmly. The firmness in her tone startled a few onlookers. It wasn't loud, but it was absolute. Derek's jaw flexed. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. At the far end..." Daniel Kim had raised his phone again, his thumb hovering over the record button. His heart pounded. He couldn't watch this unfold without evidence. But before he could hit record, Alicia's voice cut through. "Daniel," she said, her eyes meeting his. "Put it down." His chest tightened. "But not a camera," she said firmly. "Your voice. Use that instead." Daniel hesitated. He felt the weight of her words. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered the phone. "Across the room!" Robert Lewis rose from his chair. His shoulders squared despite the tremor in his hands. "This isn't right," he said loudly enough for the room to hear. "She hasn't done a thing. You're treating her like a criminal for sitting in a chair." Maria Sanchez stood too, clutching her purse tight. Her voice was softer, but carried conviction. "This happened to me, too. 2 months ago. I came to open a business account. They said my papers weren't strong enough. I felt invisible. Just like this." Susan waved her hand dismissively. Irrelevant. Sit down. No, Maria said, her voice trembling. Not this time. The room stirred again. A hush settled, as if everyone realized the scene had shifted. Alicia wasn't alone anymore. Gregory chuckled, shaking his head. What? Now we're letting the peanut gallery run the bank. He turned to Derek. Remove her already, before this circus gets worse. Derek glanced between Susan and Alicia, torn. His training told him to follow the manager's orders. His conscience whispered something else. Still, authority weighed heavier. He stepped closer to Alicia, extending a hand toward her folder. Ma'am, give me the bag and the documents. We'll clear this outside. Alicia's eyes hardened. Touch me again, she said, her voice low, steady, and this bank will answer for it. The stillness that followed was electric. Even Gregory's grin faltered for a moment. Susan's eyes narrowed. Threats won't help you here. It isn't a threat, Alicia replied. It's a fact. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Gregory broke the silence with a scoff. This is ridiculous. She's obviously stalling. She doesn't have the money. She doesn't belong here. Call the cops and be done with it. Megan nodded briskly, already reaching for the landline phone at the desk. On it. Robert's voice rose again, sharper now. You're calling the police on a woman for existing. That's what this is. Nothing else. Maria's eyes filled with tears. I know this pain. I know what it feels like to be looked at like you're nothing. Alicia turned her head toward them both. Her voice softened just slightly. Thank you. Then she looked back at Susan, Megan, and Derek. Her calm returned, though her pulse raced beneath the surface. You've accused me of fraud, she said clearly. You've humiliated me in front of a room full of witnesses, and now you've escalated it to security. Her words hung like weights in the air. Do you know why I'm still sitting here? She asked. No one answered, because the truth always walks into the room, whether you want it or not. The door swung open again, and for a brief second, everyone turned toward the entrance. But it wasn't police. Not yet. Just another client entering, pausing at the tense atmosphere, then stepping back quietly. The storm inside the lounge hadn't peaked yet. Inside, Alicia's thoughts twisted. She had planned this as a quiet test, a way to see her branch through the eyes of any ordinary customer. She had prepared herself for bias, for doubt, even for disrespect. But she hadn't expected it to escalate this far, this quickly. Should she reveal who she was now? Should she end it here? A single document from her folder would silence them all. But part of her hesitated, because revealing her title would save her, but it wouldn't save Maria. It wouldn't change the way they had looked at Robert. It wouldn't rewrite the insults Gregory hurled so freely. If she ended it too soon, the rot would remain hidden. No, she thought, not yet. Let them show themselves. Let every word be heard. Derek still loomed, his patience thinning. Megan's voice carried into the receiver as she gave dispatch the details of a suspected fraud attempt. Gregory checked his watch, sighing loudly as though this entire scene inconvenienced his schedule. And Susan. She stood with her arms crossed, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips, confident that authority was on her side, but the ground beneath her was shifting. She just didn't know it yet. The phone in Megan Price's hand clicked as she confirmed details to the police dispatcher. Her voice was sharp, efficient, carrying the weight of authority she had borrowed from her position. Yes, Megan said into the receiver. Suspected fraud. Female. Black. Mid-40s. attempting a large withdrawal, refusing to comply. Each word sliced deeper into the air. Some clients shifted uncomfortably, realizing what they were hearing wasn't just a description, but an accusation wrapped in bias. Across the lounge, Robert Lewis clenched his fists at his sides. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with the memory of dozens of moments just like this, times when people like him had been described not as who they were, but as what others feared. "That's enough," Robert said, his voice louder now, shaking but determined. He stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Susan Walker and Megan. "You're not describing her. You're profiling her. You don't even know her." Susan's head snapped toward him, eyes narrowing. "Mr. Lewis, please return to your seat. This doesn't concern you." Robert shook his head. "It concerns all of us, because what you're doing here is wrong." Gregory Hale chuckled from his chair, arms still folded across his chest. "Oh, look, the community choir has started singing. Sit down, teacher. No one's buying your speech." But Robert didn't sit. He raised his chin, his voice gaining strength. "I've been a client here for 20 years. I've never once seen a white man questioned for wearing old shoes or asking for a large withdrawal. But her, the moment she sits down, you're ready to call her a criminal." The room stirred, heads turned, whispers grew. Maria Sanchez found her courage too. She clutched her purse tighter, took a shaky breath, and stood beside Robert. Her voice was soft, but carried conviction. "He's right. 2 months ago, I came here to open a business account. I brought every document they asked for. Yin, tax papers, proof of income. And still," she swallowed hard, "still, Megan told me I wasn't suitable. She said my application would probably just get flagged. I walked out feeling like I didn't matter." Megan stiffened. "That's not relevant." "It is," Maria snapped, her voice rising for the first time. "It is relevant, because this is how you treat people who don't look like your idea of a real client." For a moment, the room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the air system. Then Alicia spoke, her voice calm but carrying a resonance that seemed to touch every corner of the lounge. "Don't whisper," she told Maria and Robert. "Say it out loud. Let them hear it." Robert's back straightened. Maria's eyes brimmed with tears, but she nodded. "This is foul," Robert said again, louder now, his voice steady. "You're not protecting the bank. You're protecting your prejudice." Maria's voice joined his. "You treated me like I didn't exist, and now you're doing the same to her." The words hung heavy in the room. They weren't just testimonies, they were truths, spoken out loud for the first time. Gregory rolled his eyes dramatically. "Oh, please. You people always make everything about race or class. Maybe you just don't belong in a private client lounge. Ever think of that Daniel Kim, who had been silent since lowering his phone, finally stepped forward. His voice was quiet at first, but firm. "I've been sitting here, trying to tell myself not to get involved, but watching this unfold, I can't stay quiet. What I'm seeing is bias, plain and simple." He looked directly at Susan. "You could have run her name. You didn't. You could have checked the system. You chose not to. That's not protocol. That's personal." Susan's face flushed red. She looked around the room, realizing control was slipping from her grip. "Enough," she snapped. "You're all being manipulated. She's playing you." Alicia's eyes lifted slowly, her calm cutting through the panic in Susan's tone. "No," she said softly. "I'm not playing anyone. I'm just sitting here. The only performance is yours." Derek shifted uncomfortably, his stance no longer as firm as before. The voices around him, the witnesses, the quiet murmurs of clients were beginning to outweigh Susan's commands. Gregory, frustrated by the turn, slammed his hand against the armrest of his chair. This is ridiculous. She's wasting everyone's time. Security should drag her out right now. But Robert shook his head firmly. No. For once, someone is standing still and refusing to be erased. And I won't watch her be silenced. The air thickened with tension, but it was no longer one-sided. The tide in the room had begun to shift. Alicia placed a hand gently on the folder before her, then looked at the faces around her, the anger in Gregory's smirk, the fear in Susan's eyes, the doubt in Megan's stare, and the courage trembling in Robert's voice, Maria's tears, Daniel's steady resolve. She exhaled slowly. Her mother's words echoed again. Even if your voice shakes, speak. Alicia looked back at Susan. You've made your accusations. You've called me a fraud. You've humiliated me in front of witnesses. And now, the truth is speaking back to you. Do you hear it? Susan's lips pressed tight. You're bluffing. Alicia's gaze didn't waver. No, I'm waiting. And in that stillness, in that fragile pause before the next storm, the power in the room shifted not because Alicia shouted, but because she invited others to raise their voices too. For the first time, Susan realized she was no longer in control. The room had already begun to fracture. On one side were the voices rising against the unfairness, Robert Lewis's anger, Maria Sanchez's trembling honesty, Daniel Kim's quiet clarity. On the other side, Susan Walker's brittle authority and Gregory Hale's smug superiority. The balance teetered, but Gregory wasn't finished. He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on Alicia Carter like she was a curiosity rather than a human being. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled a folded slip of paper from his jacket pocket. He scribbled something quickly, then flicked the note across the marble floor with the lazy grace of a man tossing crumbs to pigeons. It slid to a stop at Alicia's foot. Maria bent down before Alicia could reach for it. She opened the note, her lips trembling as she read the words. Her eyes widened. Her voice cracked as she repeated it aloud. Go to a pawn shop. A collective gasp rippled through the lounge. One elderly man set his coffee cup down with a shaky hand. A young woman by the divider shook her head in disbelief. Even the silence had texture now, heavy with shame. Gregory smirked. Satisfied? Seemed like the right advice, he said loudly. That's where people like you handle your money. Alicia's heart clenched, not from surprise, but from recognition. She'd heard variations of that line since she was a teenager, sometimes whispered in stores, sometimes scrawled on notes, sometimes dressed up in polite language, but always the same message. You don't belong. She lifted her gaze to Gregory, her expression unbroken, her voice calm but edged with steel. Every word you speak tears this bank down more than any fraud ever could. Gregory laughed, like clapping his hands once as if amused by a performance. Oh, that's rich. You think words matter? This place runs on numbers, sweetheart. And you don't have them. Susan Walker, emboldened by Gregory's arrogance, stepped closer. Enough, she snapped. Security. Detain her until the police arrive. Megan Price still held the landline phone, her voice quick and efficient as she confirmed details with dispatch. Yes, female, refusing to comply. Possible stolen funds. High-risk situation. Each phrase stabbed deeper, as though she were reciting a script she'd used before. Robert Lewis took a step forward. You're calling the police for what's sitting in a chair. Asking for her money, Megan didn't look at him. "Sir, please return to your seat." "No," Robert said firmly. "Not this time. You're not going to erase her with a phone call." Maria wiped at her eyes, her voice rising. "You erased me once. You won't erase her." Daniel Kim's phone was back in his hand, trembling as he hovered over the record button again. But once more, Alicia turned her gaze toward him. "Daniel," she said softly, "I told you words, not lenses." His jaw clenched. "But no one will believe it unless they see." "They'll believe," Alicia said, "because we'll make them hear." Her calm wasn't just steady, it was contagious. Daniel lowered his phone again, this time with resolve rather than hesitation. Susan folded her arms. "You're all being manipulated. She's not a client. She's a con artist. And you're falling for her act." Alicia looked up slowly, meeting Susan's glare without blinking. "You've accused me of fraud. You've humiliated me in front of this room. You've called the police, not because I broke a rule, but because I didn't fit your picture of who belongs here. And I'm still sitting here." Her voice never rose, but its strength filled the lounge. "Why do you think that is?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Derek Coleman, the security officer, shifted uncomfortably. His grip on authority loosened as the weight of Alicia's calm pressed against the chaos. Gregory muttered under his breath, bluffing, but the confidence in his tone had begun to crack. Susan wasn't ready to give ground. "Enough games," she barked. "This is a place of business, not a stage for your little protest. You'll be out of here in 5 minutes." Alicia took a deep breath. For a fleeting second, she considered ending it now. The folder in front of her contained everything: documents, credentials, proof beyond question. One glance inside, and the entire room would change. But she stopped herself. Not yet, because if she revealed the truth too soon, Susan would claim it was all a misunderstanding. Gregory would laugh it off as an unfortunate mistake. Megan would insist she was just following protocol. No, they needed to expose themselves fully. Their words, their choices, their actions, all of it needed to hang in the open air where no one could deny it later. The pawn shop note lay on the marble floor, a stain in ink. The phone call to the police echoed in Megan's crisp voice. The sneer on Gregory's lips was still fresh, and Alicia knew these were the receipts that mattered. She folded her hands over the folder and spoke once more, her voice like a steady drumbeat. "You're not protecting this bank. You're destroying it. And when the truth arrives, it won't need cameras. It will stand right here, in this room, for everyone to see." Maria's tears slowed. Robert's fists unclenched. Daniel's chest rose and fell with steadier breaths. The witnesses had begun to believe. But outside, faint sirens were growing louder, winding through Manhattan streets, heading toward Heritage First Bank. And inside the lounge, the storm had not yet reached its peak. The wail of sirens outside grew clearer, curling through the glass walls like a warning. In the lounge, the tension was thick enough to touch. Susan Walker paced near the espresso bar, arms crossed tight. Megan Price still clutched the landline, her voice rapid as she gave dispatch every detail she thought would make Alicia Carter look dangerous. Gregory Hale lounged back in his chair, confident the system would protect him as it always had. But Alicia sat calm, her folder unopened, her hands folded over it like it was both shield and sword. She inhaled, exhaled, then reached into her pocket and drew out her phone. Her thumb hovered for a moment over a contact labeled simply Janet Brooks, her executive assistant, her anchor, the one person who knew what Protocol 7 meant. She pressed call. The lounge stilled as Alicia lifted the phone to her ear. "Janet," she said, her voice low but steady. On the other end, Janet's voice came crisp, professional, but warm. "Yes." "Ma'am, I've been following the alerts." "Do I activate Phase 1? Alicia answered. "Escalate compliance oversight and record everything, every word, every call, every timestamp. I want a full log live before the board in 10 minutes. Janet didn't hesitate. "Understood. Protocol 7, Phase 1 is active." Susan frowned, muttering, "What game is she playing now?" But Alicia didn't look at her. She kept speaking. "Janet, notify corporate ethics and legal. Make sure the call to law enforcement is logged. And Janet?" Her tone softened just slightly. "Mark this as discriminatory escalation." "Yes, ma'am," Janet said firmly. "Already flagged. Compliance Board has joined the live stream." A murmur passed through the room. The few clients still seated glanced at one another, uneasy but attentive. Something had shifted. Robert Lewis leaned closer to Maria Sanchez and whispered, "She's not bluffing." Maria nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "She's in control." Gregory scoffed loudly, trying to recenter the room on himself. "Oh, please. Some secretary on the phone isn't going to save you. You don't belong here. You'll be out before the hour's up." Alicia turned her gaze toward him, her expression calm but piercing. "Gregory, for a man who prides himself on investments, you've chosen the wrong side of history to bet on." The words landed heavier than he expected. His smirk faltered for the first time. "Bye." The door to the lounge swung open. Derek Coleman, head of security, stepped inside, his navy blazer stiff, his shoulders squared. His presence was meant to project control, but Alicia could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "What's happening here?" Derek asked. "Scanning the room." Megan pointed instantly at Alicia. "She's refusing verification, escalating the situation, and making unauthorized calls. We've requested police. She's a fraud risk." Derek's eyes narrowed as he studied Alicia. He stepped closer, his tone sharp. "Ma'am, I'll need your bag and your tablet. Hand them over." When Alicia didn't move, he reached abruptly, knocking her purse from the adjacent chair onto the floor. "You're being detained for noncompliance," Derek declared. The gasp in the room was audible. Maria flinched. Robert muttered, "This is wrong." Alicia's gaze sharpened, her voice low but edged with fury. "Touch me again, Mr. Coleman, and it won't be protocol you'll be worried about. It'll be liability, legal, civil, and personal." For a split second, Derek froze. He wasn't used to threats spoken without raised voices. He wasn't used to calm authority. Gregory barked out a laugh, trying to break the spell. "Now she's threatening security." Classic move. But Alicia didn't take her eyes off Derek. And Derek, despite his training, took a half step back. Janet's voice came through the phone speaker again, amplified in the quiet. "Alicia, I've activated compliance review. For the record, Derek Coleman just made unauthorized physical contact with your property. The incident has been logged with timestamp. The board is watching live." The air changed. The staff froze. Susan paled. Megan's hand on the phone receiver trembled. Derek's jaw tightened. "Board," he repeated, uncertain now. "Yes," Alicia said calmly. "The same board that will determine whether this branch survives the week." Silence spread again, heavier than before. Maria Sanchez stood, her voice unsteady but determined. "This isn't protocol. This is profiling," Robert Lewis added, louder this time. "It's harassment, and it's happening right in front of us." Daniel Kim finally found his voice, firm and clear. "I wanted to record. She told me not to, but if no one else is going to say it, this is discrimination, plain and simple." The clients' voices began to knit together, no longer whispers, but statements. Gregory shifted uncomfortably, his earlier arrogance cracking like thin ice. "Oh, come on. You're all being dramatic. This is just standard procedure." But no one was buying it anymore. The sirens outside grew louder, closer. Susan clung to the last of her authority. "The police will sort this out. And when they do, you'll see she's nothing but a fraud." Alicia finally rose from her chair, her presence filling the lounge without need for volume. Her hands rested lightly on the black folder she still hadn't opened. Her voice carried not just calm, but inevitability. "You've accused me. You've humiliated me. You've called the police, not because I broke rules, but because of what you saw when I walked in. And now, you want to hide behind procedure." She paused, her eyes sweeping across Susan. "Megan, Derek, Gregory, but there's no procedure strong enough to cover bias once it's spoken out loud." The weight of her words pressed against the silence like a verdict waiting to be delivered. And in the distance, the sirens reached the front doors of Heritage First Bank. The sirens that had been a distant hum now blared just outside. The glass doors at the front of Heritage First Bank swung open, and two uniformed officers stepped into the marble-floored lobby. Their boots echoed with each step as they entered the private client lounge. The air shifted. Clients straightened in their chairs. Staff froze mid-breath. Officer Mark Daniels, a white man in his mid-40s with lines etched deeply across his face, scanned the room. His partner, Officer Carla Nguyen, a younger woman with sharp eyes and a steady presence, followed close behind. Daniel's voice carried authority but also fatigue, the kind that comes from years of walking into tense rooms. "We got a report of fraud, possible stolen funds. Who made the call?" Megan Price immediately raised her hand, stepping forward with rehearsed confidence. "I did, officer." This woman, she pointed at Alicia Carter, is impersonating a high-net-worth client. She's refusing verification. She demanded $500,000 in cash. Gas echoed from clients who hadn't yet heard the full accusation. Megan's words rang sharp, as though scripted. Officer Nguyen tilted her head slightly, her gaze moving from Megan to Alicia. "Ma'am, is that accurate? Are you refusing verification?" Before Alicia could respond, Robert Lewis stepped forward, his voice filled with quiet anger. "That's not the whole story. They refused to even check her ID. They mocked her. They humiliated her. This isn't fraud, it's profiling," Maria Sanchez added quickly, her voice trembling but clear. She didn't even raise her voice. "They called security and the police because of how she looks." Nguyen's eyes softened slightly. She turned back to Alicia. "Do you want to speak?" Alicia met her gaze calmly. "In a moment. First, I'd like this room to finish revealing itself." Susan Walker, desperate to reassert authority, snapped. Don't let her manipulate this. She's spinning a story. Officers. She's trespassing in a restricted lounge. She needs to be removed immediately. Gregory Hale, ever eager to insert himself, waved his platinum-colored card. "I'm a priority client. I was here. I saw everything. She's wasting everyone's time." You need to do your job and drag her out. Nguyen raised a brow but said nothing yet. Daniels rubbed his temple, clearly aware this was no simple fraud case. Alicia inhaled deeply, then finally spoke. Her voice carried across the lounge, calm yet commanding. For the last 15 minutes, I've sat here while accusations piled on me. Fraud, theft, trespassing. Not because I broke a rule, but because of who you decided I was the second I walked in. She paused, scanning Susan, Megan, Gregory, and Derek. You didn't ask for my ID. You didn't check the system. You went straight to suspicion, straight to bias. And now, you've involved law enforcement in your prejudice. Her words settled over the room like a gavel. Janet Brooks' voice cut in through the phone, loud enough for all to hear. For the record, officers, this call to law enforcement has already been logged and escalated to Heritage First's Compliance Board. Every phrase, fraud. Trespassing. Con artist has been transcribed in real time. Nguyen's eyes flicked to Daniels. He gave a small nod, silently acknowledging this wasn't routine anymore. Susan tried again, her voice shrill. Don't listen to her. This is a stunt. She's trying to scare us with fancy words and phone calls. She doesn't belong here. Doesn't belong, Alicia repeated softly, almost to herself. Then she raised her head, her voice firm. Those words right there. That's the truth of this room. The tension snapped when Daniel Kim finally stepped forward, his voice louder than it had been all day. She's telling the truth, he said. I was going to film it, but she told me not to. She wanted us to say it, so I'm saying it. They never gave her a chance. They humiliated her. Gregory threw a note at her that said, Go to a pawn shop. Guests echoed again. Officer Nguyen's brow furrowed. She turned to Gregory. Is that true? Gregory's face flushed. It was a joke. Don't be so sensitive. It wasn't a joke, Maria snapped, surprising herself with the force in her voice. It was cruelty. And we all heard it, Robert added. You don't treat a human being like that. Not anywhere, and especially not in a bank. The room shifted again, more voices aligning with Alicia. The weight of truth was tilting the balance. Daniels finally spoke, his tone deliberate. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're not removing anyone yet. We're going to listen. We're going to log every statement. Because what I'm hearing doesn't sound like a fraud case. It sounds like discrimination. Susan sputtered. That's absurd. Nguyen's gaze cut sharp toward her. Then prove otherwise. Did you run her ID? Susan faltered. Well, no. Because what Nguyen pressed. Megan tried to interject. It was protocol, no, Alicia said firmly, cutting her off. It was prejudice dressed up as protocol, and every person in this room knows it. The silence that followed was electric. Then Alicia did what none of them expected. She finally opened the black folder she had guarded so carefully. Inside lay a corporate ID, embossed in gold with the Heritage First Bank seal, a notarized certificate of ownership, and a letter signed by the board of directors. She turned it slowly, first to the officers, then to the room. My name is Alicia Carter. I am the founder and CEO of Carter Enterprises. I own 79% of Heritage First Bank. This is not a stunt. This is my institution. The reveal hit like thunder. Susan's face drained of color. Megan staggered back against the wall. Derek froze, his earlier bravado gone. Gregory's smirk collapsed completely, and the clients, Robert, Maria, Daniel, and half a dozen others broke into stunned applause. Nguyen's lips parted in disbelief, then curved into the faintest nod. Daniels exhaled heavily, muttering under his breath, "Well, damn." But Alicia wasn't finished. She stepped forward, her voice now sharp as a blade. "The problem isn't that you didn't know who I was. The problem is how you treated me when you thought I was no one." The words landed like a final verdict. Even the officers, who had walked in expecting fraud, now stood as witnesses to something much larger. The storm had broken, but the reckoning had only just begun. The applause that erupted in the private lounge was not the polite kind one might hear at a charity gala. It was sharp, full, and alive in affirmation that the truth had finally pierced through the haze of lies. For a moment, even the marble walls seemed to vibrate with it. But the staff who had orchestrated Alicia's humiliation were not clapping. Susan Walker stood frozen, her lips parted as if to argue, but with no words to fill the gap. Megan Price leaned heavily against the wall, her hand still clutching the receiver, though the line had long since gone silent. Derek Coleman's fists opened and closed by his sides, his training warring with the realization that his authority had dissolved in front of witnesses. Gregory Hale sat stiffly, red creeping up his neck, his platinum card dangling useless in his hand. Alicia Carter let the applause fade before she spoke again. 10 minutes ago, she began, her voice clear and measured, I was told I didn't belong here. I was called a fraud. I was accused of theft. Security was summoned. Police were called, all without a single verification. Her gaze cut to Susan first. Branch Manager Walker, you made a choice. You could have checked my credentials. Instead, you chose humiliation. You abused your authority. You profiled me. And you did it loudly, for everyone to hear. Susan's mouth worked soundlessly. Her face flushed, then paled. I didn't know who you were, she stammered. Alicia's expression didn't soften. That's the point. It shouldn't matter who I am. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Turning, Alicia addressed Megan, Private Banker Price. You didn't just stand by. You escalated. You fabricated a false report to the police, describing me as a fraud, a threat. That's not protocol. That's slander. And you knew it. Megan's composure crumbled. Her eyes welled as she whispered, I thought I was protecting the bank. No, Alicia said, her tone firm but not cruel. You were protecting your own bias. And in doing so, you endangered me. The truth hung in the air like smoke no one could wave away. Then Alicia faced Derek Coleman, head of security Coleman. You crossed the line from enforcing safety to enforcing prejudice. You touched my property without consent. You attempted unlawful detainment. You believed intimidation would silence me, but intimidation only exposed you. Derek's jaw clenched. For the first time, he didn't have a command to give, only silence to endure. Finally, Alicia turned toward Gregory Hale, the man who had thought his wealth insulated him from accountability. Mr. Hale, she said, her voice colder now. You weren't staff. You weren't bound by policy. Yet you took it upon yourself to humiliate me. You threw a note at my feet telling me to go to a pawn shop. You laughed as if cruelty were your right. But wealth does not grant dignity when character is absent. Gregory's smirk was gone, replaced by a hard swallow. You can't ban me, he blurted. I'm worth more to this bank than half the people in this room. From the side, Maria Sanchez shouted, her voice cracking. Not today, you're not. Robert Lewis added. Not ever again. The room erupted not in applause this time, but in voices rising, overlapping, fueled by righteous anger. Alicia raised her hand gently, and the voices softened. This is the moment of reckoning, she said. And reckoning isn't about shouting louder. It's about accountability. She lifted her phone. Janet Brooks' voice came through once more, steady and precise. Compliance Directive 4B grants you full termination authority. Ms. Carter, HR is logged in. You may proceed. The staff paled visibly. Alicia turned first to Susan. Susan Walker, you are terminated effective immediately. Racial bias, abuse of authority, obstruction of client services. Your tenure here ends today. Susan shook her head in disbelief, whispering, You can't. But the words died when she saw the officers watching, when she saw the witnesses nodding. Next, Alicia faced Megan. Megan Price, you are terminated for filing a false report, escalating a situation you knew was rooted in prejudice and bearing prior complaints. You didn't just fail to act. You corrupted the process. Megan's composure collapsed. She sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. Derek Coleman, Alicia continued, you are dismissed for aggression, unlawful detainment, and failing to de-escalate. A security badge is a promise of safety, not a weapon of fear. You broke that promise. Derek didn't argue. He simply lowered his head. The fight drained out of him. Finally, Alicia turned to Gregory. And Gregory Hale, you are hereby banned from Heritage First Bank and all Carter Enterprises affiliates. Harassment, documented misconduct, racism. We don't build institutions for egos. We build them for dignity. You will never walk through these doors again as a client. Gregory sprang from his chair, face red. You'll regret this. I'll pull my accounts. But his words drowned beneath the surge of applause that rolled through the lounge like thunder. Clients stood, clapping with a rhythm that carried more than approval. It carried relief, justice, a release of years of silent frustration. Officer Carla Nguyen nodded subtly. Justice in real time, she murmured, almost to herself. Alicia didn't smile. She simply stood tall, letting the sound wash over her. When the clapping eased, she spoke again. Her tone softened, yet every syllable struck deep. The problem was never my presence. The problem was your prejudice. And today, that prejudice cost you everything. She turned toward the officers. No arrests, no handcuffs. Accountability will be handled here, in-house, through compliance and law. But what happened in this room will not be forgotten. Nguyen nodded in agreement. Daniel scribbled notes, his brow furrowed, but respectful. Alicia's gaze swept over the remaining clients, Robert, Maria, Daniel, and those who had sat in silence, but now leaned forward with new understanding. This isn't just about what they did. It's about what we do next. And that begins here, Maria whispered. She's rewriting the rules, Daniel added softly. And we're witnesses. Robert folded his arms, his voice warm. No more than witnesses. We're part of it now. The room was no longer just a lounge. It had become a courtroom, a stage, a seedbed for change. And Alicia Carter, without ever raising her voice, had transformed humiliation into history. The echoes of applause still lingered when the quiet returned. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of shifting weight, the kind that comes when the truth has settled, but consequences have yet to be measured. Alicia Carter remained standing at the center of the lounge, calm and resolute. Her black folder rested on the table, open now, for everyone to see. The golden crest of Heritage First Bank gleamed under the recessed lighting like a seal of judgment. Then, from the back of the room, a voice trembled into the silence. "Wait," Megan Price said. Her hands shook as she lowered them from her face. Her eyes were red, but her voice carried something raw. "I need to say something." The room tensed. Clients leaned forward. Susan shot her a sharp glare, but Megan didn't look at her. "I buried complaints," Megan admitted, her voice cracking. 8 in the last year, all from women of color. I marked them duplicates, unverifiable, or out of policy windows. I did it because I thought keeping numbers clean meant keeping my job. Susan told me to do what I had to, and I did. Geese filled the room. Robert Lewis muttered, "My God," Susan snapped. "You liar! You're trying to save yourself." But Megan shook her head fiercely, tears slipping down her cheeks. "No, I'm telling the truth." "Stephen," she stopped, catching herself. "Others knew. I was part of it. I chose silence and complicity. And now it's out." Janet Brooks' voice came through the phone immediately. "Confirmed. Compliance records show 8 flagged complaints, all suppressed at branch level. Audio logs tie back to Megan Price and sign-offs under Susan Walker." The weight of confirmation was devastating. Susan's knees buckled slightly. She reached for the edge of the espresso bar to steady herself. Alicia's tone was steady, not harsh. "You weren't following orders. Megan, you were holding the torch while others burned. But at least today, you chose to speak. That choice matters." Megan wept silently, shoulders shaking. Then Derek Coleman, who had stood stiff and silent, suddenly cleared his throat. His voice was low, tired. "She's not the only one." The room turned. Derek's eyes lowered. 2 months ago, Megan came to me. She said corporate was sniffing around, that Susan had a plan to bury red flags. My job was to make sure anyone who complained got removed before it turned into paperwork. I flagged clients as high risk based on how they looked, how they asked questions, whether they challenged fees. I profiled them. I knew it. I did it anyway. Maria Sanchez gasped audibly. Daniel Kim whispered, "That's systematic." Derek swallowed hard. "I deserve to be fired. I deserve worse. But I need you to know there's more. There's a list, a private tag in the CRM system. Problem clients. It's longer than you think." Janet's voice came sharp. "Pulling it now? Freezing access? Forensic review initiated?" A pause. 17 names. 15 are black or Hispanic. Logged. The air grew thick. It wasn't just individuals anymore. It was a culture. Alicia's face remained composed, but her chest ached. The confirmation didn't surprise her, but hearing it said aloud, laid bare, still cut deep. "You turned a system meant to protect into a weapon," she said softly to Derek. "And now you want consequence." Derek nodded. "I do. Not grace. Just consequence." Alicia didn't answer him directly. She looked to the room instead. "Do you see now? This was never a single moment. It was a pattern. And today, that pattern ends." The clients murmured agreement. Maria's eyes shone with tears. Robert looked as though he carried both relief and grief. Then another voice rose, older and raspier. "There's one more thing." At the back, an elderly man stood. His silver hair was neatly combed, his suit pressed through, worn at the edges. A client badge hung from his lapel. Arthur Kensington. "I retired from this bank 10 years ago," Arthur said, his voice trembling. "I trained managers in this region. I trained Susan. I trained others. And I'll admit something I've never said publicly. We taught them to prioritize appearance. We never said race or class out loud. We used words like client quality, posture, suitability, but it meant the same thing. It created this. The room froze. Susan looked at him in horror. Arthur's eyes shone with shame. I watched today, and I realized I helped build this, and I need to help tear it down. I'll give a full deposition. I'll assist with reform. The weight of his confession rippled across the room. Alicia stepped closer, her expression firm but not cruel. Why now? Arthur swallowed. Because watching you dismantle this with nothing but your voice made me realize I had one too, and I never used it. Until now. Alicia studied him for a moment, then gave a single nod. Then use it well, because silence is how this system survived, and silence will never save it again. The room seemed to breathe again. Nia Jackson, a young black woman who had sat quietly near the divider until now, rose to her feet. Her denim jacket was creased from sitting so long. Her voice wavered but carried truth. They did it to me too. 2 weeks ago, I came to open a photography business account. Megan refused to run my EIN. She said freelancers with inconsistent histories weren't eligible, but I recorded it. I never posted it. I thought it wouldn't matter. Megan covered her face in shame. God. Alicia turned gently to Nia. It matters now, and you won't be silenced again. From today forward, your account will be opened by the executive board. Fee-free. That's my promise. Nia's eyes filled with tears. I just wanted to be seen, to be taken seriously. You are, Alicia said, her voice steady. You always were. Today just proved it. The room was no longer just a lounge. It was becoming something else, part tribunal, part confessional, part rebirth. And Alicia Carter stood at its center, turning fracture into foundation. The private lounge no longer felt like a sanctuary of marble and glass. It had transformed into a chamber of reckoning. Every chair, every wall seemed to lean in closer as voices carried the weight of truth that had long been buried. Alicia Carter stood still, listening, not rushing to fill the silence. It was in these pauses that people often revealed themselves. And today, the confessions had already begun to change the air. Arthur Kensington had admitted to building the very system that allowed prejudice to thrive. Megan Price had confessed to burying complaints. Derek Coleman had admitted to profiling. And Nia Jackson had stepped forward with her own story of being dismissed. This was no longer about Alicia alone. It had become about everyone in the room. Alicia spoke softly, her words deliberate. This isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning of accountability. You've all seen what happens when silence protects bias. And today, silence was broken. She turned toward the officers. You came here expecting to find fraud. Instead, you found truth. Will you record it that way? Officer Carla Nguyen nodded firmly. Yes, ma'am. Every statement will be logged. Our report will reflect exactly what happened here. Officer Mark Daniels added, This is bigger than one call. It deserves a full investigation, and we'll write it that way. Their voices carried legitimacy that no one in the staff could dismiss. Susan Walker, however, was not ready to surrender. Her voice cut through the moment, high and brittle. This is chaos. She's manipulating all of you. She's turning a misunderstanding into a spectacle. None of this proves she belongs here. Alicia turned her head slowly, her calmness almost disarming. You're still clinging to the lie. Susan, The problem isn't that I belong here. The problem is that you believed I didn't. Clients murmured in agreement. Robert Lewis shook his head, muttering, "Some people never learn." Maria Sanchez spoke louder, her confidence growing with each word. "We've all been quiet too long. I stayed silent when I was dismissed here before. But seeing her stand, seeing all of this unfold, I can't stay quiet anymore. This bank isn't broken by one mistake. It's broken because people like you made silence the rule," Daniel Kim added, his voice steady now, "and she made words the rule instead." He looked toward Alicia. "That's why I didn't record. Because this is bigger than a clip, it's a change." Gregory Hale scoffed, trying to recapture attention. "This is all theater. You'll see. None of this sticks. Money talks. People forget. You'll move on." But no one nodded this time. Instead, Robert glared at him. "Not anymore. We're done forgetting." Even Derek Coleman, his posture heavy with guilt, muttered, "You're wrong, Hale. It sticks. It'll stick with me for the rest of my life." Gregory looked around, realizing his power was evaporating. His card meant nothing in this room now. Alicia let the voices settle before she spoke again. Her tone was no longer only firm. It carried a vision. Effective immediately. This branch is paused. No transactions, no new accounts, no meetings. Everything stops until we reset what this institution stands for. The declaration rippled through the lounge. Instead of resistance, heads nodded. Clients clapped softly, not in celebration, but in approval. Robert said aloud what many were thinking. "It's about time." Maria leaned forward, her voice hopeful. "Then what happens next?" Alicia met her eyes. "We begin reform right here, right now. Heritage First will no longer measure success only in dollars. We will measure it in dignity. Starting today, this branch becomes the test site for verbal audits, diversity accountability, and a values pledge for every staff member who wants to remain employed," Daniel whispered, almost to himself. "That changes everything," Alicia continued, her voice carrying both steel and compassion. "No more hiding bias behind numbers. We will track words. We will listen to what is said and what is not said. Because fairness isn't just a policy, it's a practice. And every practice leaves a record." The idea hung in the air, radical but undeniable. Arthur Kensington spoke again, his old voice carrying new strength. "I'll help build that training. I owe it. Let me use my voice this time." Alicia gave him a single nod. "Then you'll be part of the reform. Because accountability doesn't end with firing. It begins with rebuilding." The applause this time was softer, but it carried something stronger than excitement resolve. Susan shook her head. "Desperate. You think you can erase decades of tradition with one speech." With one day, Alicia's gaze was unwavering. Not erase, replace, because tradition built on silence doesn't deserve to survive. "What comes next will," Megan whispered through tears. "I don't deserve to be part of it." Alicia looked at her, her tone steady but not cruel. "You're right, you don't. But your confession will be. Because it shows what happens when fear replaces courage. Others will learn from your failure." Derek bowed his head. "And mine." For a moment, the room felt like a mirror, each person seeing themselves in its reflection flaws, failures, courage, and choices. Alicia stepped back, drawing a breath. This bank answers to no individual ego anymore. Not Susan's, not Gregory's, not even mine. It answers to the people it was built to serve, and that begins here with all of you as witnesses." The officers exchanged a glance, as if they too had felt the shift. Daniels muttered, "Never seen anything like this." Nguyen nodded. "It's not just a bank anymore. It's a statement." Alicia turned to the clients who had stood up for her: Robert, Maria, Daniel, and even Nia, still clutching her phone against her chest. "You weren't just bystanders today. You were the reason this truth came out. Remember that, because silence breaks when one voice speaks, and then another, and another, until it can't be ignored." Robert's eyes softened. "Feels like history," Maria whispered. "Feels like healing." Daniel nodded slowly. "Feels like change." And as Alicia Carter stood at the center of the lounge, no longer the dismissed stranger, but the leader of a reckoning, the bank that once tried to silence her had become the very place where silence died. The weight of what had unfolded in the lounge settled into a quieter rhythm. The anger had been voiced, the confessions spoken, the firings delivered. But Alicia Carter knew the hardest part was only beginning. Ending injustice was one thing. Building something better in its place was another. She looked around the lounge, taking in each face. The marble counters, the leather chairs, the polished steel fixtures, symbols of wealth and exclusivity, suddenly seemed hollow. What gave this room meaning were not the materials, but the people who now stood within it. "This is where we rebuild," Alicia said softly. "Not tomorrow, not next week. Now." Clients leaned in, listening. Officers Daniels and Nguyen stood steady, their presence more supportive than threatening now. Even the silence of those who had been complicit felt different, less like resistance, more like resignation. Alicia tapped her folder gently. "Heritage First will be more than a bank. It will be a promise that dignity is not optional, a promise that respect is non-negotiable, and a promise that when bias rears its head, it will be met not with silence, but with action." Maria Sanchez's eyes shone. "How do you make a bank do that?" Alicia smiled faintly. "By remembering that a bank is only as moral as the people inside it. We change the people, we change the culture, and we start here, today." She turned toward Janet Brooks' voice, still audible on speakerphone. "Janet, initiate Summit Equity Program. Phase 1 verbal audits, bias response training, client dignity charter." "Yes, ma'am," Janet replied. "Board has approved on emergency vote. Materials are ready to deploy. All branches will be notified tonight." The room stirred with murmurs. Robert Lewis whispered, "She planned this. She came prepared for war." Daniel Kim corrected him gently. "Not war. Change." Arthur Kensington cleared his throat. His old voice carried both guilt and resolve. "I want to be part of those audits. I train managers wrong. Let me retrain them right. Let me give back what I took." Alicia nodded once. "Then you'll lead the first workshop. Your confession today has value only if it becomes prevention tomorrow." Arthur's eyes misted, and he lowered his head in gratitude. Alicia's gaze shifted to Nia Jackson, who stood clutching her phone like a shield. "You wanted to be taken seriously as an entrepreneur. You will be. Your photography account will be opened fee-free, and I want you to sit on the first client advisory panel. Real reform doesn't happen without the voices of people like you." Nia's lips trembled into a smile. "Me on a panel, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Alicia replied softly. "Yes," Nia whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Yes." Applause rippled gently through the room again, but this time it wasn't sharp or angry, it was hopeful. Lighter. Gregory Hale, however, could not stand the direction the room had taken. His voice cut harshly through the calm. "This is absurd. You think real clients will stay. You think investors want politics with their portfolios. You'll drive this bank into the ground." Robert Lewis turned on him. "No, you already did," Maria added. "What she's building is the only reason I'll keep my account here." Daniel spoke next, his voice steady. "People don't just want numbers. They want trust. And she's the first person here I trust." Gregory sputtered, but the momentum had left him. His threats fell flat, bouncing off walls that no longer carried his weight. Alicia faced him calmly. "Gregory, you're no longer part of this story, and you'll never again use this institution to prop up your arrogance. Leave. Now." Gregory's mouth opened to argue, but the officers stepped forward. Daniel spoke firmly. "Sir, you've been banned. Time to go." Gregory looked around, searching for an ally. Finding none, he stormed toward the door, his footsteps echoing like the retreat of a toppled empire. The door closed behind him, and the air seemed cleaner. Alicia exhaled slowly. One voice of hatred gone, but many voices remain. "And that's what matters," Maria whispered. "It feels different already." Alicia nodded. "Because truth has no expiration date. Once spoken, it doesn't fade. It grows." She paused, scanning the room. "But remember, this isn't just my responsibility. Change isn't built by one person. It's built by all of us. Robert, Maria, Daniel, Nia, Arthur. You stood up today. That matters. Carry it beyond this room, into your homes, your businesses, your communities, because dignity is only real when it's lived." Robert's voice rumbled warmly. "We will. You've given us the courage," Daniel added. "And the example," Nia whispered. "And the hope." Even Officer Nguyen, who had come expecting confrontation, spoke softly. "I walked in ready to arrest someone. I'm leaving reminded of why justice matters." Alicia let their words rest in the air before she delivered her closing promise. "This branch will not be remembered as the place where bias thrived. It will be remembered as the place where bias died. And every client, every employee who walks through these doors from this day forward will feel that difference." The applause rose again, full and certain. For the first time since stepping into the lounge, Alicia allowed herself a small, genuine smile. She had not raised her voice. She had not begged for recognition. She had simply held her ground, spoken her truth, and forced the room to face its own reflection. Humiliation had been her entrance. Dignity was her exit. And as the room filled with voices of hope, Alicia Carter knew this was not just her victory. It was theirs. The applause finally subsided, leaving behind a hum of energy that was almost tangible. Alicia Carter stood in the center of the private client lounge, her posture calm but unshakable. The polished marble floors no longer reflected a space of exclusion. They reflected a gathering of people who had witnessed something greater than any transaction. She placed the black folder with her ownership documents back into her bag, but the weight of her authority remained in the air. Alicia's voice softened now, deliberate and measured. For the last hour, this room has shown the best and worst of what a bank can be. It showed cruelty, arrogance, silence, and fear. But it also showed courage, truth, and the beginning of change. That's the story I want Heritage First to tell. Clients leaned in closer. Even those who had stayed quiet earlier were visibly moved. Robert Lewis raised his hand slightly, his voice carrying the gravity of his years. "Ma'am, I've lived long enough to know systems rarely change. But today you gave me something I haven't felt in a long time. Hope. Please don't let this fade." Alicia looked him in the eye. "It won't fade, Robert. Not while I have breath. and not while each of you carries it forward." Maria Sanchez clasped her hands together, her voice almost trembling. "I walked in here afraid they wouldn't even look at me. And now I feel seen. That matters more than any number in my account." Daniel Kim nodded beside her. "Respect should never be rare. But it feels rare. What you're building, it feels like what banking was supposed to be all along." Alicia absorbed their words, allowing a pause to stretch just long enough to feel real. That's because banking isn't just about money, it's about trust. And trust grows from dignity. If we forget that, we lose everything. The officer shifted near the door, but not with impatience. Officer Daniels folded his arms, almost protective. Officer Guyon scribbled a few final notes into her pad, then looked up. "Ms. Carter," she said, "I've been a police officer for a decade. Most times when we get called into a bank, it's messy accusations, shouting, fear. Today was different. Today I saw truth win without violence. I'll be writing my report carefully. But I want you to know, I'll remember this day." Alicia bowed her head slightly. "Thank you. Officer Nguyen, justice isn't loud, it's clear. And I think we all heard it today." There was another pause, gentle this time. Then Arthur Kensington, the elderly retired trainer, stepped forward again. His hand trembled slightly as he gripped his cane. "Ms. Carter, I trained people to believe posture was power. I told them that wealth had a look, a tone, even a skin. I thought I was teaching professionalism, but I was teaching prejudice. Watching you undo all of that with a steady voice, it broke me. But it also freed me. If you'll let me, I want to help rewrite those manuals. From the ground up." Alicia's smile was faint but sincere. "Arthur, I don't want to erase what you taught. I want to expose it, so we never forget how easily bias hides behind professional language. You'll help us write a new curriculum, not to cover up the past, but to redeem it." Arthur's lips quivered as he whispered, "Thank you." From the back, Nia Jackson raised her hand timidly. "Miss Carter? Alicia? I don't know much about banking, but I know about being ignored. If you really want voices like mine at the table, I'll try. I'm scared, but I'll try." Alicia walked toward her, every step deliberate. She reached out and gently touched Nia's shoulder. "That's all I ask. Not perfection, not expertise, just willingness. You're already stronger than you think. You stood up today when it mattered, and you'll keep standing, together. We will." Tears filled Nia's eyes, but this time they weren't from pain, they were from possibility. The room seemed to exhale collectively. Janet Brooks' voice came again through Alicia's phone speaker. "Ms. Carter, corporate has completed the emergency vote. The Summit Equity Program is no longer pilot, it's policy. Every branch will begin compliance audits within 72 hours. The board has also granted you authority to lead the national rollout." Gas and murmurs spread across the lounge. Maria covered her mouth in astonishment. Robert whispered, "National? This is bigger than us." Alicia's tone stayed steady. It had to be, because the problem was never just this branch. It was every place silence gave bias a home. That ends now. Even Derek Coleman, the dismissed head of security who had sat quietly after his confession, lifted his head. His voice was hoarse. "You didn't have to let me stay and listen, but you did, and it broke something in me. I can't undo what I did, but I can choose what I do tomorrow. I'll cooperate with every audit. I'll testify if needed. I owe that much." Alicia looked at him, her expression steady. "Accountability isn't a gift. Derek, it's a debt. and paying it is the only way forward. Do it honestly, and maybe you'll find a way to contribute again. But that choice is yours." He nodded slowly, almost gratefully. The police officers gave each other a look. Daniels cleared his throat. "Ms. Carter, we came here for one thing. We're leaving with something entirely different. We'll file our report, but more importantly, we'll carry this lesson into our own precinct. Because bias isn't only in banks," Alicia responded. "Bias is everywhere, which means justice must be everywhere, too." The quiet after her words was not heavy this time. It was freeing. Clients began to disperse slowly, but many lingered, shaking hands, offering words of encouragement, promising to support the new program. For the first time, the private client lounge felt less like a fortress of exclusion and more like a community hall. As the last clusters of people began to leave, Alicia stood still for a moment, absorbing the gravity of what had been born in this space. She thought of her father, denied a loan decades earlier despite collateral, because his skin carried the wrong story for the banker behind the desk. She thought of her younger self, dismissed, belittled, told she didn't belong, and now she stood here the owner, the decision-maker, the catalyst for reform. Her voice was almost a whisper, spoken to no one and everyone at once. "This is what belonging looks like." Janet's voice returned one last time, clear and calm. "Ms. Carter, corporate asked for your closing directive for the record." Alicia took a breath and spoke the words that would define not just the day, but the future, effective immediately. Heritage First will operate on a simple principle: dignity first. If you cannot offer respect, you cannot serve here. If you cannot see humanity, you cannot stay here. And if you cannot speak truth, you cannot lead here. That is our new foundation. Her words echoed softly against the marble, not sharp, but indelible. And with that, the meeting that began with humiliation ended with transformation. The firings were only the beginning. The real story was the birth of a culture where silence no longer won. Alicia gathered her things, nodded once to the officers, and stepped toward the branch's inner offices where the compliance team was waiting. Clients who remained followed her with their eyes, not as someone untouchable, but as someone who had made them believe change was possible. The heavy doors closed gently behind her, but the legacy she left in the lounge did not leave. It lingered in every corner, every reflection, every memory of what had been said. Heritage First would never be the same, and perhaps neither would the people who witnessed it. The story of Alicia Carter reminds us that justice is not always found in courtrooms or headlines. It often begins in the quiet strength of refusing to be diminished. In a single morning, Alicia turned humiliation into reform, proving that dignity, once defended, has the power to transform not just individuals, but institutions. For older audiences who may have faced rejection, bias, or disrespect at different points in their lives, this story carries a familiar truth. Silence allows prejudice to grow, but steady voices can break it apart. Alicia's calm response, choosing truth over anger, patience over chaos, teaches us that authority isn't always loud. It's consistent, deliberate, and rooted in self-respect. The lesson here isn't only for banks or workplaces. It is for families, communities, and each of us personally. When we encounter injustice, big or small, we face a choice: walk away, or stand and let the truth be seen. Change does not come from one person alone, but it can start with one voice refusing to bend. And perhaps that's the most important reminder. Respect isn't given by titles or wealth. It's something every human being deserves, and something each of us can defend, no matter our age. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful journey. If this story touched your heart, we'd be grateful if you could like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that matter. Your support helps us keep telling the truths that spark change.